Today is October 29th, which means we have 3 days until Halloween. So that means I get to tell you about number 3 on my haunted house list, and that is LaLaurie Mansion in New Orleans, Louisiana. This one I'm actually excited to talk about because it's actually been featured on one of my favorite series, which is American Horror Story. And it was season 3, and I believe it was called The Coven, and it featured Kathy Bates, who played Madame LaLaurie. Now, of course, television is going to kind of blow things up a little bit more than it was, but a lot of things that they said in there were pretty close to accurate from what we know. Madame LaLaurie was actually a wealthy socialite in Louisiana, and she met her husband, Dr. LaLaurie, who he actually came over from France to be a doctor. In 1832, they bought the mansion on Royal Street. Now, back then was definitely a different time, and she was actually able to own slaves. Well, the problem wasn't that she owned slaves, the problem was how she treated her slaves. Many of her slaves were tortured and mistreated. There was actually an instance where somebody saw Madame LaLaurie chasing the child of one of the slaves around the courtyard with a whip, and the child, in an attempt to escape, actually climbed on the roof of this mansion and fell to her death. In 1834, there was a fire in the house, and it was said that this fire was started by one of the slaves. The slave was actually chained to the stove, and so she started the fire to get some kind of help. When the community saw the fire, they rushed over and started getting people out of the house, and that's when they started realizing that the slaves had been chained up and they weren't being treated properly. The community was so upset that they tried to detain Madame LaLaurie until the sheriff got there, but the sheriff never came, so eventually she fled, and nobody really knows where she went, but we believe she went to Paris and never returned. Once she was gone, the new owners attempted to rebuild the house, and during the rebuild process, they started finding human remains, and some of these they noticed broken bones. There were even some skulls that were buried, and they had holes in their head. People who have actually been in the house have said that they've heard footsteps, and they've even heard people yelling from pain. One interesting thing about this house is that it was actually owned by Nicolas Cage. He bought the house in 2007 for $3.2 million. Some say the house is cursed because in 2009 he actually lost the house due to foreclosure. In 2010, it was bought by a private owner, and he paid $2.2 million when the property actually appraised for close to $3.4 million. The property has 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, and is over 10,000 square feet. Looking at the property right now, if you were to buy something similar to that in Louisiana, in the French Quarters district, you're probably looking at paying close to $4 to maybe $6 million. If you're a little curious about my location, I'm actually in my garage right now. I wanted to find something that kind of gave an atmosphere of an attic, but not quite as creepy. Plus, I have my little special guest here. Say hello to Isabel. She's my protective tortoise, and she's going to help keep all the ghosts away from me. Make sure to come back tomorrow and find out which haunted house is number 2 on my list. I'll give you a hint. It's probably one of the most well-known haunted houses out there. There's been numerous movies and books written about this haunted house. So, can you guess which one it is?